Hi everybody, TJ Mack Vintage Cards, and today I'm doing a second episode of my AFL case build where I'm going to talk about some of the great players that played in the AFL, which was the American Football League, which existed for 10 seasons from 1960 to 1969 before it merged with the NFL in 1970. So I'm going to have 30 cards that I'm going to do in this series that I'm going to put in a case that will ultimately be displayed in my card room. Now, some of these cards I've had in my collection for years, but I'm still adding some cards to this case just because I want to deepen my AFL collection as I learn about these players. It's bringing me a lot of enjoyment, researching and learning about these players as I purchase them and then add them to my collection. So I thought I would just share that with the community here. I don't really see too much out there on the AFL, so it's nice to learn about some different players. And the first player I'm going to profile after last time's episode with Lance Allworth. This week I'm going to profile today two players, but the first is going to be this man right here, Rich Tombstone Jackson. And for those who don't follow the history of football too closely, Rich Jackson might be the best defensive end that you never heard of. Now, there's this article that I read on him in Sports Illustrated that said from 1968 to 1970, there was no better pass rusher in all of football than Tombstone Jackson. He collected 10.5 sacks in 68, 12.5 in 1969, and 10 more in 1970 after the AFL merged with the NFL. Now, despite increased competition from elite NFL passers, such as this guy right here, Deacon Jones, is depicted on his 71 tops, and this man right here, Carl Eller, his 1965 Philadelphia card. I'll put those side by side for a second. These guys were the two premier defensive ends in the NFL, and then when they merged, you added Rich Tombstone Jackson to the mix. I'm going to shrink that down here a little bit so you can see these three together. So these three really were the premier defensive ends in football. And then you also had Claude Humphrey, who was good as well with the Atlanta Falcons. But these three guys here were really competing for those all-pro honors. And as you can see here on the 71 Topps card, they have the red and the blue around the border. Those were used for the All-Stars that year. And if you weren't an All-Star, you had a blue border if you were in the NFC or a red border if you played in the AFC. So both these men were all pros in 1970 NFL season. And then you had Carl Eller as well, who was also an all-pro player that year as well. So these three were the preeminent players at the defensive end position. Eller and Deacon Jones are in the Hall of Fame, but Rich Jackson is not. And that's really unfortunate because he was a disruptive force at defensive end. And what I will note is here on his card, I'll bring it a little closer, it says defensive tackle, but he actually was a defensive end. And if you look at the back of the card, it says it right there on the top that he was a defensive end. And what's nice about these 71 Topps is they put a lot of nice information on the back of the cards. They're pretty descriptive. And Tombstone, he was a guy that, like Deacon Jones, employed the head slap. So when they go to the line, they would, when the ball is hiked, they would slap the offensive lineman on the side of the head, usually by the ear hole, and it would disrupt their concentration and their balance, and it actually would hurt as well, and that would make them lose focus, and then the defensive end, be it Jones or Tombstone, would run around them and then get to the quarterback. So it was a really a great move until it was outlawed in 1977. And they would often debate one another who started the head slap. Tombstone thought he was the one that originated it, and Deacon Jones thought he was the one that originated it. But it was a very useful technique for both of them. Certainly got Jones in the Hall of Fame, in addition to his other great exploits on the field as a run stopper and just everything else he could do as a player. And Tombstone didn't make it that far just because his career was really marred with injuries after the 1970 season. In the seventh game of the 71 season, he had a knee injury, and it ended his greatness, not his career. He still played some games in 1972, and then after 4 games in that season, he was traded to the Browns, and then he was finished after the 1972 season and retired. So he felt shortchanged. You can make a case that if you are one that likes voting for Hall of Fame players, if they were excellent for a shorter time in their career, he would be a guy that you would want to consider. He didn't have the longevity, but he was great for the short time that he did play. And he started in 1965 with the Raiders, but he played on their played in the preseason, then broke his jaw, and then he was on the taxi squad for the rest of the year. And then in 66, he played for a short time with the Raiders before being traded to the Broncos, where he achieved his greatness as a player after that. So just a guy that I was real happy about adding into my collection. He only played in 3 of the 10 seasons of the AFL, but I'm including him in this case because in those 3 seasons, he really achieved such a level of greatness that they placed him on the second-team defensive end on the All-AFL team. So he's second-team All-AFL for the decade, even though he only played 3 seasons. That's how great Tombstone Jackson was. So I just thought I'd share a little bit about him, and I will put some short video clips on him below so you can see him in action. The other player I want to profile today is Daryl Lamonica. He's a quarterback, played with the Bills and the Oakland Raiders from 1963 when he was drafted all the way till 1974. He was a 24th round pick by the Bills out of Notre Dame, and he was a 12th round pick by the Packers in the 63 NFL draft. And originally he thought about playing for the Packers, but he chose the Bills because he thought he had a far better chance of winning the starting job in Buffalo than he did with Green Bay, because Green Bay had this guy right here, Bart Starr, who was right in the middle of quarterbacking those Vince Lombardi dynasty teams of the 1960s. So he went out to Buffalo and thought he could compete with this man right here, Jack Kemp, who was recently the quarterback of the Bills. He came into the league earlier in 1960 with the Chargers, but then went over to the Bills where he became their starting quarterback. And Lamonica was never able to beat out Kemp, but he showed enough to convince Al Davis, the Oakland Raiders owner, to trade for him prior to the 1967 season. And Lamonica would take over at quarterback, and he would quarterback the Oakland Raiders to a 13-1 record in the AFL championship. And that season, he won the MVP of the AFL when he passed for 3,228 yards and 30 touchdowns. Ironically, he lost to the star-led Green Bay Packers in Super Bowl II, 33-14. Now, Lamonica was the perfect passer to run Al Davis's offense, which really relied on those quick strikes. And the card here that I'm showing is a 1964 Topps card, and this is his rookie card. And the 64 Topps set is a AFL exclusive set. There were no NFL cards in the 64 Topps. The NFL cards were in the Philadelphia issues from 1964. So Davis created what was known as the vertical passing game, meaning as often as possible the ball goes deep down the field. And Lamonica was really perfect for it. He had more touchdowns than interceptions in his career, in spite of only having a completion percentage just above 49%. So he threw that deep ball pretty accurate, at least not for interceptions. As again, he finished with more touchdowns than interceptions, but there was a lot of incompletions just because of the way the defenses were back then and the risk taking that quarterbacks took in that era. And it was Howard Cosell that named Lamonica the Mad Bomber during a Monday Night Football broadcast in the early 1970s, and it stuck for good reason. He was a guy that would just go back and unload that ball, and he was going for broke on every play. And that's what Lynn Dawson, one of his rival quarterbacks with the Kansas City Chiefs, had to say about him. He just liked to chuck that ball down the field. Now, Lamonica never reached the Hall of Fame, but he was twice named first-team All-Pro in the AFL. He won the MVP in 67, as I said, but he also won it in 1969 as well. And he won a remarkable 66, 16, and 6 as a starter, with only 4 of those wins coming with the Bills. And he averaged a remarkable 14.9 yards per completion and finished his career with 19,154 passing yards and 164 touchdowns. Now, Lamonica was the only starter in the NFL or AFL for 6 full seasons, but that overall record is really incredible. He had a 75% winning percentage. And from a 3-year stretch from 1967 to 1969, he was 36-4-1. He made it to the AFC or AFL title game in each of his 4 seasons as a starter. So really a spectacular quarterback and somebody I'm really happy to have in my collection just because of the type of player he was. And when you think of 1960s players, the Mad Bomber Daryl Lamonica is one of those guys that really comes to mind. And he was one of those quarterbacks of the AFL that was really in the limelight for that era and even into the early part of the NFL. So very happy to show him and add him to this case build. So now we're going to have 3 players, in this case build that we got so far. So we'll put a little spotlight on them. We'll keep it going here. In the next installment, we'll do either cards 4, or I might do 2 and do cards 4 and 5. So really appreciate you checking this out. And now I'm just going to show you a care package that I received recently. Now I just want to highlight this awesome care package that I received from Brian with Bears Cards 34. And Brian and I have become friends through the community. We both have an interest in football. Of course, he's a big Bears fan, hence the name Bears Card 34. And he knew my son was a Cowboys and Bills fan, just like I am. And he said, hey, let me send something over to him. And boy, he really did something real special here. He sent all these cards to him, including this Staubach card, this greatest Staubach, and a Ezekiel Elliott card, and then just all of these wonderful cards from the 70s, late 70s, 79 tops, into the 2000s, and really just the who's who of the Dallas Cowboys and the Bills. And I highlighted some of these 81 tops because this is one of my early years of collecting. And man, I just was thrilled when I saw this, and my son was so excited to go through all of these cards and just really sharing some good memories of players that I saw play. And that's really what this hobby is about, is just those connections to the past and to the present, and just how you have those family connections as well, just in our love of sports and the sports history. And you can just, see that really here. A lot of great football history depicted in these cards. And it just really bridges that gap between the generations, and just has that special commonality of love in sports as it's reflected in the cards. So just wanted to, again, thank Brian so much. Check out his channel. I'll put a link down below if you already haven't. Bear Cards 34 puts out a lot of great content. If you like football and also some basketball as well, Brian's your guy. You're going to really love what he puts out there. So just want to highlight him, and I wish everybody a great weekend, and we will talk again soon. Have a great day.